So good afternoon. My name is Jeff Dirk, and I'm Chairman of Biomedical Engineering at Case Western Reserve. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you today to the Case-Coulter Distinguished Lecture Series. Today's program will start with basically some brief remarks to give you a sense of what this Coulter Translational Research Partnership provides here at Case Western Reserve. Today's program is essentially one element of that translational research partner between the Wallace H. Coulter Foundation, the Department of Biomedical Engineering faculty, and our physician colleagues from around the medical institutions and the School of Medicine here in Northeastern Ohio. I'd like to stress the word partnership. For just over 3 years, the Biomedical Engineering Department has been working in partnership with the foundation to develop a translational research process within biomedical engineering. While the phrase translational research may have as many definitions as people within this room, essentially what we're trying to do is create some sense of uniqueness about our efforts to translate our technologies from the Biomedical Engineering Department into the medical marketplace. And I think there's three essentially basic ideas about what's unique about our program. First, we're trying to create a sense of urgency about the practical application of our research discoveries. That is, to not wait until the very end of the process. Secondly, we try to plant within our research teams the need to visualize, commercialize, or strategic next step outcomes early in the research process so we can hand off our discoveries better down the road. And I think it's the unique opportunities we have within biomedical engineering and the medical institutional partnerships that we have here that allow us to do that. And finally, in today's competitive landscape, no one should be doing this alone. In the same spirit that the Wallace H. Coulter built a successful company by reaching out and working with physicians and commercializing new ideas, we too are trying to embark on that same process, and yet within the academic environment. Over the past 3 years, we found this type of partnership fosters unique opportunities for research, innovative ideas about what are the real needs in the medical marketplace, and finally, how best we can translate them to our different partners, whether it be a company that's interested in licensing, a startup, or even our physician partners interested in doing a clinical trial. So today's program is essentially a natural extension of the Coulter Case partnership, in which we encourage projects to begin with the end in mind. Many product development efforts fail because another type of partnership is often overlooked. That with the overall community that's responsible to take the discoveries further. So simply put, we cannot cross the valley of death alone. Research and development by ourselves is complicated enough, and it's essential that we consider the opinions, experiences, and stories of those who have traveled the path before. So Case Western Reserve is grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with the Coulter Foundation on the goal of translating our technologies and innovations. We're pretty pleased that the partnership provides the opportunity for everyone in this room and in this Northeastern Ohio community to hear the voice of experience of some of the things that are important in this process, as well as to think about how we will do that better in the future. So it's my pleasure at this point to turn the podium over to our President Snyder, who introduced today's speaker.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon. Before I do what I came here to do, I do want to congratulate the entire Case School of Engineering for another fantastic e-week. I applaud the return of the egg drop today, as well as the many other activities that engaged the community all week long. Whether it was this past weekend's carnival at the Great Lakes Science Center or the Lego robotics competition yesterday, you were all showing Greater Cleveland just how exciting engineering is here at Case Western Reserve University. This afternoon's lecture represents another highlight of our e-week programs. As you all know, I like to describe biomedical engineering as one of the jewels in the university's crown. A joint program of our schools of medicine and engineering, BME offers a model of precisely the kind of interdisciplinary work we all want to do more of across our campus. The department is already nationally renowned and is well on its way to even greater achievements under the leadership of its outstanding chair, appointed last year, Jeff Dirk. Another key element of biomedical engineering success over the years has been its focus on translational work. Our faculty focused on taking innovations from bench to bedside long before that phrase ever became part of the popular nomenclature. An important part of that process is, of course, the private sector, specifically securing partners and resources necessary to get new technology out to patients. I can think of no one better qualified to offer us insight on that process than our speaker today. When DeNovo Ventures announced that he had joined the firm 6 years ago, the headline called him a medical technology veteran. Why? Because he had led or founded at least half a dozen different healthcare and technology-related firms, among them Origin Medsystems, Guidant Corporation, and iTopics Research. In such roles, he has worked with minimally invasive surgical devices, medical software, and artificial lenses used in cataract surgery. Add in his time as managing director at DeNovo, a life sciences venture capital firm, and his service on the boards of several other healthcare companies, and it is clear that our speaker today is truly a master in the field. It is my great privilege to introduce Joe Mandato, a member of the Case Western Reserve University Board of Trustees, a graduate of our Executive Doctorate in Management program, to present the 2009 Case-Coulter Distinguished Lecture. Joe.
This is a bit overwhelming. We talked about a classroom full of students, and I was so looking forward to that. It's great to see a lot of students here, and I would encourage you to ask questions. People over 30, raise your hand first, all right, for recognition. And then so, fellow board members, I'm flattered that you're here. Thank you very much. President Snyder, Dean Tien, Dean Davis, I've seen you here, Professor Dwork. My former professors, I'm a graduate, by the way, of my doctoral program of '04, not so very long ago. And as my professor will attest, it is true that as you get older, brain cells do diminish in life. And I was the oldest in my class by a factor, right, Bo? So I'm honored and flattered to be here speaking with you today through the support of the Coulter Foundation. The mission of the Coulter Foundation is to support Case and 9 other fine institutions to develop transformative research and to drive that research from the bench to the bedside. And that's a very important variable. Science for science sake is all wonderful, but in fact, taking the science, developing an application, and delivering it to a patient is the true value of any good medical device. Wikipedia defines innovation as does everybody else. The one differentiator they say is innovation includes something that is useful. And so as we talk today, we're going to try to determine what variables come into play as a venture capitalist evaluates opportunities that he or she sees on a frequent basis. The title of my talk, Getting to Yes, what does? Now, the day I developed the talk, it was a valid talk, okay? Things have changed dramatically. So some of these variables may need some modification. At the end of the presentation, I'll talk about the impact of venture capital. I'll also identify several medical device opportunities that I was involved with in the beginning and kind of compare them against the metrics that we set up to measure the value of new technology. I think there are a bunch of clinicians here. I think there are a bunch of students here. That's wonderful, and a bunch of faculty. So I'll look forward to hearing your questions, and whatever I say is only my opinion, okay? The life of an entrepreneur is a very challenging one by any standard. Of the many challenges he or she faces on a daily basis, an important and one of the most challenging, I think, is raising money successfully. In order to do what you need to do, and today we had some presentations, people were looking for very modest amounts of money to do some very important things. Being able to go to a venture capitalist, being able to justify the opportunity, and being able to raise adequate capital is one of the most punishing processes, I think, known to man, all right? Having been on the other side of the table. There are essentially four choices. You can do a bootstrap operation where, in fact, you use your own money or your own resources in order to develop the product. You can go to angels, those individuals that perhaps were successful entrepreneurs that have excess cash they're looking to invest in new opportunities. You can go to friends and family. That's a burden, obviously. You don't want to fail if you're using your friends and family's money, right? And finally, you can go to an institutional investor or a venture investor. There are advantages and disadvantages to each of those categories. However, the most expensive and I think the most excruciating to obtain can be venture. But first, I'm going to define venture capital. Okay, so venture capital is a pool of capital raised from foundations and endowments. Case Western Reserve University and many other universities allocate a modest portion of their endowments to venture. And the rationale for that is, if you dedicate 5% of your endowment to a high-risk venture and it doesn't work out, well, the impact is not all that great. On the other hand, if you're fortunate enough to invest money in the next Google, the impact is so disproportionate to the risk, okay? And the return is so disproportionate to the risk that this as an asset category is something that many foundations and universities avidly support. So this capital, these funds are earmarked for risky investments, and VCs, which used to be a pejorative term for those of you over 40, right? Provide funds to early, mid, and late-stage startup companies and financing ranging from as little as $1 million to $50 million. So the limited partners, i.e. the universities, will invest and create a fund, all right? The venture capitalists will gather, and we are paid from fees that we charge our investors. The fees we use to pay for all of our expenses, our infrastructure and support. The VCs invest in a new company, and we call money from the limited partner. If a limited partner commits to us a significant amount of money, they don't have to send us a check. What they do is, when we find an investment worthy of their investment, we will call and say, send 5% of what you committed to DeNovo, all right? And so it is not all that burdensome. And the intent is, as you invest the 5%, it is hoped that in the course of the next year or two, money will start coming back, and that will fund your next contribution and your next contribution, okay? That's not always the case, and I think in this environment, that will not be the case for a while. So the entrepreneur comes to us. If the company succeeds through a merger or an acquisition, or in the old days, an IPO, that's good for everybody. The equity is returned to the LP, the VC, and the entrepreneur does well. So the goals are, the VCs are to maximize the return on investment. You want to please the limited partners, and you want to have the limited partners want to invest in your next fund and your next fund. The life of a fund, the investment cycle is 3 years. The life of a fund is usually around 10 years. So after 10 years, it is hoped that you will get all your money back and a lot more. Okay. You measure that return in terms of internal rate of return, and you want to meet or beat similar asset classes indices. All right, there are third-party organizations that measure the performance of venture firms. And what is good for the LPs, obviously, is great for the entrepreneurs and the VCs. And you also want to meet the LPs' expectations relative to risk profile, stage profile, and portfolio effect. What impact you have on their portfolio, okay? If you have your Google, and in medical devices, you don't have Googles, then everybody's very, very happy. In medical devices, you can get some significant returns, and there have been some wonderful returns over the years. So today's topic is about what we really care about when we're evaluating different opportunities, all right? And the variables we consider are the business opportunity, the management, which is really critical, the market, intellectual property, regulatory and reimbursement, which is something particular to medical devices, which is really problematic, okay? And the return on investment. Can we as investors make money on this opportunity, and what kind of a deal can we strike at the end of the day, which respects the integrity and the dignity of the entrepreneur? We can't be too greedy. That's not constructive. But at the same time, we have to do what is necessary to get the kind of return we need, okay? So the process of getting the money, as I have experience as an entrepreneur, is one where after countless calls and a formal introduction, you're successful in getting a meeting with a venture firm. In my early experience, and many times since, the meeting was highlighted by a young wonderkind, fresh from our nation's finest business schools, challenging the entrepreneur or expressing strong opinions counter to the entrepreneur with extraordinary conviction, little or no data, and even less experience. But he or she is entitled to do that. Venture financing is kind of a young industry. It's kind of a cottage industry. Many of the firms have 5 to 10 people working in them. They have lots of flexibility relative to their schedules, and it is a lengthy process. You may make a presentation, make another one to another partner the following week, come back 6 times and only have seen 6 different partners. So the process is excruciating. So we tried to develop a better way, a more objective way to analyze a business opportunity. We developed a scale with appropriate metrics to at least give a legitimate basis for a sound evaluation and a sound debate based on some facts. The scale attempts to quantify and grade the many variables, which I've listed there, that can contribute to the success or failure of an enterprise. And although nothing about the scale can withstand any rigor, it does give those young wonderkind and those not so young a framework with which to work as they attempt to shred your ideas that might have a chance to change the very practice of medicine. So let's talk about the scale and those variables as we investors, that we investors care about. And we'll also bring to light several companies as examples and measure those companies against some of those scales. At the end of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about what changes have happened in the industry, and that's very important, and what the impact in recent history that venture has had on the medical device business. So as we look at the scale, we have 3 categories. That's some skepticism there, all right? That's our term for skepticism. Acceptable and superb. In this case, we're talking about the business opportunity. So we look at the stage. Where is the company relative to its evolution? Whoops. Is it an idea? That's pretty early. And in fact, in this morning's presentations, we heard some wonderful ideas, but they were really early. Or has there been some validation? All right, has it been used in a patient? Has it been used in an animal? Or is there a working model? That would be wonderful, all right? The business plan. Everything has to have a business plan, okay? A justification for what you're trying to do. It can be naive. It can be good thinking with great research, and that's really important. It could be pragmatic and doable. That's even more important. I think there's a common sense component to not only venture investing, there's a huge common sense component in taking a device and making it successful. Execution. Well, sometimes you find the inmates in charge, all right? That's not good for the company. You've got a random group of individuals, each struggling for their own power, and that just doesn't play well. You've got a group with a great attitude, but it clearly needs work, but that's okay. Or you've got a passionate and determined group of people that are so determined to make this successful that you would back them in most any circumstance. What about the market environment, all right? There are some things that won't play, that won't be successful, that cannot get to market, all right, for whatever reason. There's some excitement. You can bring something to a physician, a clinician, and they will be excited about it, and that's an important indicator. As part of any of your market research, you need to talk to 10 or 15 physicians, get their sense of what this product might have from an impact standpoint. That's very important in the evaluation. Occasionally, somebody will say, I want it now. I mean, clinical practice demands certain innovations. If you can come up with that, that's really exciting. And finally, the product. We talk about a science project. So we're not in the business of funding science projects. And one of the challenges we all have as we evaluate opportunities is the timeline. How long will this take to see the light of day? And that's a really important variable. In other cases, you'll see a product, but it's kind of like 10 or 20% better than what's already out there. So are you going to invest millions of dollars to get that product to market? I think that would be a really big challenge. And finally, I have a category I term disruptive. And of course, that word has been used over and over and over again, but it has impact. I've got some examples of what's disruptive, not only in devices, but in other areas of medicine, okay? What a disruptive product does, though, it challenges the status quo. It is a threat to the market. Previous. Can I get the previous slide? Oh, we'll talk about this. That's okay. So some of the disruptive technologies in healthcare, all right? So medical doctors. So if you go to a physician practice in the old days, the physician would be doing everything, okay? He would perform a basic exam. He would do an intake interview. He would, or she would perform all of the relatively simple, low-margin tasks necessary to manage a practice. Well, now you have nurse practitioners, okay? You're able to lever the physician's time, and there's huge value, and the value is easily measurable. Going from really big general hospitals, the delivery of care is now in the ambulatory surgery center, the outpatient clinics, what we're talking about, and home care. And again, the cost of delivery of care is much lower than if you were brought into a general hospital for a relatively minor procedure. Open surgery versus minimally invasive surgery. Again, a huge impact on medicine. And in the beginning, kind of a threat, all right? People were doing gallbladder surgery through a 5 or 6 inch incision. And through minimally invasive means, you could do the same procedure through a 5 millimeter incision, all right? And the clinician said, well, gee, I don't have any clinical data. There's some logic, with all due respect. There's some logic to medical device innovation, and sometimes you may not have the 2,000 cases you need to demonstrate data, but it's really logical. And many medical devices have been developed in a very logical way. Angioplasty, right? I mean, you could do an open procedure, a CABG, huge hospitalization, huge cost, or you could do an angioplasty and go home the next day. That's pretty exciting stuff. And the ones I'm going to describe, braces, we have a nice contingent of young people here, many of whom have experienced braces, scalpels, and ugly hearing aids, all right? So I'm going to talk about those because I have not so ugly hearing aids in. You can't see them. They're not visible. And we think it's a very, very exciting innovation. Okay, so Invisalign. Right? So I was teaching a class at Stanford Business School, and after class, 2 young students, second-year MBA students, came up and asked my opinion of their idea. Their idea was get rid of metal braces because they're ugly, and they hurt, and replace it with a clear plastic retainer type product, okay? So, and they asked for my help if I'd be interested in being on the board, blah, blah, blah. And so it was a great experience. They were naive. They had no clue what they didn't know. They had no clue whatsoever. But they had tremendous passion, all right? And they were not to be denied. At the end of the day, these people are selling hundreds of thousands of those braces now all over the world. It's a $300 million company. That's staggering. These two kids, one of whom was an investment banker, so that experience doesn't count for anything, right? And the other was a bright young woman who had studied environmental science, okay? So neither one was in a position to contribute to the ultimate success of this company, except for their passion. But at the end of the day, that counted a great deal. The second innovation. So this is something that I and my colleagues at Origin found at the Stanford Research Institute. This is the Vinci Robot. So imagine, if you will, those of you creating medical devices and wanting to introduce them to the market, going to a clinician and saying, instead of that $10 scalpel, I want you to buy $1 million robot. That was a really hard sell. That was a really hard sell. And it took a long time because it was technology developed at SRI for military applications. It was used for remote surgery, okay? The physician is here, you're there. So I take my students down there from Stanford, and they are using this thing and picking up 5mm O-rings in 5 minutes, never having touched that thing. It's extraordinary. They're doing sutures on chicken legs within 10 minutes. That's extraordinary. So the basis for looking at this is not so much to replace a scalpel, but in fact, to be the operating room of the future, right? It's a different platform. And the basis for being excited is, it is a faster procedure, there's less blood loss, the person gets back to work faster, blah, blah, blah. So the next thing was, okay, what application can we use it for? Initially, they thought cardiovascular surgery was very logical. That took a long time. They ended up in urology, where a urologist in Germany used it without anybody knowing it, and it worked really well. So 80% of all prostatectomies are done with the Da Vinci now. And that company is $1 billion company. Who would have thought? And the next one was my favorite, the lyric hearing device. So the CEO from a hearing company said, we're going to put design into our product and make a fashion statement. Huh? A fashion statement? What are you, nuts? That's awful. And yet, it's something, the demographic of this opportunity, there are 30 million Americans with clinically measurable and significant hearing loss, okay? 5 million could use this tomorrow. 5 million are using a device now, and 40% of them, in well-accepted data, do not like what they've got already, or do not use what they've got already. That's a huge opportunity. And so we very much like that as a disruptive opportunity. So do you kind of see, I mean, do they all qualify as being disruptive? Yeah. So if you take it to the marketplace, what are the reactions, all right? And these are quotes, all right? And most of them were made relative to the Da Vinci. But, and they were made by the same doctor. How do you know it's disruptive? Ask the market. Abject horror. Are you out of your mind? Absolutely. Swift denunciation. It's not just a bad idea, it's dangerous. Begrudging acceptance. There may be limited applications. And finally, well, I thought about that about 10 years ago. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. Like I said to the clinicians in the room, my opinions only, okay? But that's pretty interesting. So let's go back to what we were talking about, okay? Evaluating opportunities relative to these three examples. So now we're talking about the management team. This to me is probably the most important component. A great management team with a mediocre idea has a better chance of success than a great idea with a mediocre management team. So many times there's no CEO, there's a founder. The founder is generally a technical person, and history has shown that that person needs to turn over at some point in the future. Perhaps they have a CEO waiting for the company to get funded, or on occasion there's a great one there. Sometimes you've got a trainee in the position, and that's a high risk. That's high risk for us. In the case of InSound, the founder was in the position of CEO. The company was not a young company. It was founded in '99. We invested in '04. We had seen it, but we could not make that fit into our little scales, simply because of this founder, okay? The CEO, he just wasn't doing the job. He didn't know how to do the job. And so we made the investment, and I went over there for a year as the acting CEO, which is not what I am paid to do, nor do my limited partners want me to spend all my time doing that. They want me to invest money, okay? So that was a problem. The work ethic. It's very easy to determine the work ethic of the people. And you will see people that just, well, I'd like to stay around, but I've got a golf date, all right? That's the end of that, all right? That's a simple cross. Then you've got somebody that's driven to succeed, and then you've got somebody that works as hard as I do, and that is financeable, okay? The guys at Align worked harder than anybody. They were all students, all students. Is the team entrepreneurial, or does the management team mostly come from a big company experience with no small company experience, or do you have somebody with a combination? Or is there a creative maverick, okay? Obviously, in the case of Da Vinci, there was a creative maverick. In the case of InSound, there was a creative maverick for the first couple of years, and then he reached his point of diminishing returns. And the team cohesion. There's nothing worse than having a presentation by a team and having them argue with one another for most of that presentation. It saves us a lot of time, obviously, but it is not a good way to approach a venture firm. A budding team, a good fit, and that was the case with Invisalign. It was a budding team, but it was a great fit. The market. Is there a market? Will somebody buy this product at the end of the day? You know, in each of those categories that I showed you, there really wasn't an established market. I mean, nobody said, I got to have a robot, all right? Nobody, the people with the deep in the canal hearing device, nobody thought that could be done, okay? And Invisalign, you had technology that was 50 years old, so no real hurry to change that, right? So at best, you know, you've got to make some assumptions on the viability of the product in this marketplace. Is it forming, or is there immediate need? That's ideal, but you'll see that less often. Is the market growing, or is it explosive? Will the clinicians accept it, or do they have what they need? One of the challenges you've got with physicians is their training is such that they are taught, based on hundreds of years of experience, how to do certain procedures. And it's a simple protocol, and you follow that protocol step by step by step. How do you get them to change their protocol? That's a hard thing to do. So when you're looking at the market, it's a perfect bell curve. It's the lower left-hand corner of the bell curve. It's those early adopters that are willing to go out on a limb, look at something, evaluate something that may be a little speculative, but does make some sense, and give it a shot. And once that's done, once the data's been accumulated, then you have a better chance of going to the mass market. And competition. I mean, there's always competition. In some cases, it's just really crowded. In other cases, you're a potential leader. And if you're the first funded in that category, that's the best, obviously. Any questions so far from the students? No? Intellectual property. This is something, and the presentations today, everybody kind of touched on intellectual property. This is a very important part of medical device innovation. Medical device innovation is driven by these entrepreneurs who are also very protective of their technology. It is an extremely litigious industry, And yet, those of you that have had lots of experience in it know that at best, it is gray. It is never black or white. You do not have a slam dunk, no matter how much intellectual property you've got. And that's been proven so many times, okay? So, having said that, you've got to do it, all right? And you've got to file something. You've got to have something issue in a relatively short term. Is the ownership of the intellectual property scary complex? In other words, do you have to kind of muddle around a very dense intellectual property portfolio in order to determine if you do have the wherewithal to build this product? And in medical device innovation, there's a ton of IP already there, okay? There's always IP. You've got to see, is there a niche I can fit into? The IP approach. This is one where there's a huge strategic component to IP. So if you look at it tactically, and you take a small part of the widget and you protect that widget, what can somebody do to get around it? You've got to anticipate that, file on that too, file on really try to look out into the future and anticipate what other people might do to get around your IP. That's a strategic approach to IP, and that's great. And your counsel. There are some counsels out there that really have a good sense of how to do this, and you should take full advantage of that counsel. Regulatory and reimbursement. Regulatory is really a burden for our industry. Number one, it's an uncontrollable variable. All you can do is go to the FDA, ask their opinion. Their opinion lasts for a day or shorter, all right? So it's a moving target. And unfortunately, you don't know where that target is at any point in time, all right? So there's significant uncontrollable variable risk in regulatory. You've got to be able to justify an easy application, and you've got to be able to say with some assurance that it's going to be approved in a reasonably short time. Then we have three pathways. The PMA is the one that takes the longest. There's a lot of clinical studies involved. It's years and millions upon millions of dollars to get that done. That's less exciting, but it's a fact of life. 510K, which I think applies mostly to medical devices. You see a lot of them have a 510K, and what they're doing there is they're referencing a predicate device, something that has already been developed that kind of looks, feels, or performs in a similar fashion to what you're developing. That is a much longer, much shorter cycle, I'm sorry. And is the approval almost here? That's priceless. Reimbursement. One of the real challenges in our industry is you're dependent on a third party to pay you for the product. And the process to get that approval is a very lengthy, time-consuming, tough process. And the excuse always is, you need more clinical data. Well, that's baloney. We have a product that has 2,500 successful cases that show, beyond any shadow of a doubt, clinical superiority to current practice, and yet the AMA said, well, we need more data. That's an excuse. I'm busy, come back another time, right? That's tough. So we look very hard at reimbursement, and sometimes the management teams have no clue. They leave this to last. They think this will happen. It doesn't happen. It's hard work, but with a reasonable amount of effort, you can get it done. Or it's a chip shot, and no such thing exists as being a chip shot in our industry, right? Many people have been disappointed by thinking theirs was a chip shot. The return on investment. Again, this goes to the plan. So some people will come in and make really crazy projections. It demonstrates not only don't they have a clue as to their market, but they haven't worked very hard to figure it out. Can you get the company up to $50 million within 5 years? That's pretty exciting. Can you get it above that? That's even more exciting. And not a whole lot of companies can do that. Invisalign went from 1 to 4 to 40 to 100. That was perhaps one of the fastest growth industries in medical devices. The other thing you should keep in mind, and I didn't put it up there actually, the other thing you need to keep in mind relative to disruptive products, the first generation doesn't work as a rule. It really doesn't work. So the people that bought the Invisalign braces initially were young adults that wouldn't be caught dead in braces and didn't have much of a malocclusion at all. Okay, it was a very simple correction. But historically, disruptive medical devices don't work on the first generation. InSound's product did not work on the first generation or the second generation. It's now on like the 4th or 5th generation, but it works, okay? The degree of sophistication of the plan. Is it on a napkin? Is it researched and documented? Does the team know it cold and the reasons why? Okay, that's the most exciting. Sorry. The capital requirements. In biotech, it costs over $100 million to get anywhere close to the market. That's a tremendous amount of money. And what's worse, the biotechs, all of whom are staffed by Nobel laureates, all of whom have the best scientific team known to man, and at the end of 10 years, you fail, and it's a big bagel. You have nothing. That's awful. That is really awful. We don't do a lot of that. Medical devices are less binary, okay? It will work to some degree, normally. Ideally, you would have, like a company that requires less than $40 million to get to break even, or to get to an acquisition, to get to an exit point. And there are a lot of those around. The time to liquidity, it's really important in my personal evaluation of product opportunities to measure it against the demographic and the probability of me being around to enjoy the fruits of all that labor. I'm not interested in a 10-year opportunity. I think that's just too long. I'm interested in a 2 or 3 year opportunity or a 4 or 5 year opportunity. No problem. I mean, we have to be realistic, but you don't want to get into something that just doesn't have an end point in the foreseeable future. And the exit, you can only speculate as to the exit. Right now, the only exits are mergers and acquisitions. There are no IPOs. And finally, the deal. What kind of a transaction can I construct, okay? We look very hard at the co-investors. Are there, why did I put clinicians up there? Angels, okay? Angels aren't very interesting because you usually need a bunch of them, okay? Clinicians, we evaluated a company in dermatology, and there are 250 shareholders, all of whom were dermatologists. That's 250 phone calls you're probably going to get once a month, once a quarter to see how the company's doing and when their dividend check will show up. That's a tough group to manage. It's a very tough group to manage. So we're interested in organizations that have other quality VCs involved in what we call a strong syndicate. 2 or 3 VCs that have the same philosophies, same size of funds, et cetera. What does the board look like? Angels, lawyers, or people with industry experience, or a very diversified team of executives with enough experience in those areas that can be matched against the company's needs. That's the best. The existing terms, very often people overreach. And so that's kind of a bad sign. It's more of an indicator of bad things, and in all probability, you need to walk away. Yeah. Okay? Pre-money valuation. Again, you've got to be realistic. How are you valuing this company? And what is the basis for your value? People will come in with an idea, and they will say, we think the company's worth $10 million based on that idea. $10 million seems like a lot of money to me, doesn't it? Why would you give value of $10 million to this individual and he or she hasn't done anything yet to demonstrate that it really is worth that much? I'm taking all the risk. If they lose, they go on and get another job. So the risk has got to closely correlate with the pricing, okay? The money to work. In order for us to have an impact on our little fund, we have to have enough to invest, at a high enough sum to invest, to have an impact on our fund. I mentioned funds are live in 10-year cycles. We have 3 funds. Our third fund is $300 million. So in order to impact a venture fund of $300 million, we've got to figure out opportunities that will deliver according to the standard metric in the market. We've got to take 300 and make it 650 somehow. Only when you run those numbers does it become really daunting. That's incredibly. You have to find something that really is going to generate a big return. And we consider a big return to be 3 to 5 times our money, or anything higher. That's really exciting. One company I didn't talk about is a company called Fox Hollow Technologies, and this was founded by Dr. John Simpson, who essentially founded angioplasty. And by the way, I didn't mention, so angioplasty, you know, spreading the plaque in the arterial wall and delivering a stent. Well, the name on the patent for the stent is Lilip Lau, who is a graduate of Case Western Reserve University. That's a big, big patent, okay? And Lilip has done a phenomenal job in the medical device industry. What was I talking about before that? Oh, John Simpson. So he developed something to treat peripheral artery disease. You know, the arteries getting plugged up in your lower limbs, okay? He went to 40 venture firms. He got turned down by 40 venture firms. Why? We funded him. We funded him. His son-in-law worked with us. I don't know how objective we were at the end of the day, but we funded him. And that returned the entire fund in one fell swoop. It was a 9X. We were heroes, through no fault of our own. We were heroes. But why did 40 venture firms turn him down? It doesn't make sense. So, I mean, it's an art form. And the young wonder kind making their decisions based on how they make decisions doesn't always work that way. Ownership potential. We absolutely need to have double-digit ownership, and preferably above 25%. So if it's successful, 25% of a small number is still good. 25% of a big number is really great, okay? So what is the impact? Yes?
Well, I'm not a student, but it's okay.
Right. Don't make it difficult.
On the previous slide, you show ownership and co-investment. You don't mention universities, which oftentimes want an equity stake up front just to license the IP.
Right. Right.
Universities licensing the IP. So how is...
That's fine.
How do you take that?
Oh yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. That, you know, anything coming out of a university, there is an expectation for an equity stake, and that's perfectly fine. It's a matter of, you know, whatever the number turns out to be. Obviously, it has to be a reasonable number, but that's well accepted and kind of the norm. Was there another question? Okay, so what has venture capital done? Okay, what's the impact been? Well, interestingly, in the last 5 years, 350 venture-funded firms have been acquired, okay, by the likes of Medtronic, by the likes of Guidant, by the likes of Boston Scientific. If you think about it, the VC community has to depend, they're busy spending all their R&D money on their existing stuff. They've got to protect their franchise. They've got to protect the franchise. They rely on venture-supported firms for their next major product line. And the data would absolutely support that. And if you're trying to quantify the number of deals in any of these clinical specialties, the numbers are astounding. Now, obviously, not all these things are successful. The fallout rate is quite high. It's well over 50% that just kind of fail. But the impact in the clinic, more than 100 million, and this is from the National Venture Capital Association, more than 100 million Americans have been positively impacted by venture-backed medical innovations developed over the past 20 years. Product revenues provide a return of $50 for every dollar invested in recent new products and as much as $7.50 for every venture dollar invested in products introduced 10 or 15 years ago, like angioplasty, the stent. Every year they sell a couple of $1 billion worth of stents every year, okay? The first stent was put in a garage in Palo Alto by Dr. Simpson, right? And Lilith Lau standing next to him. That's pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible. And companies, one day there's these two young business school students taking on this extraordinary challenge to figure out how to move teeth, to figure out how to develop the algorithms to move teeth, to figure out how they're going to manufacture these things. They didn't know how to manufacture them. I didn't know how to manufacture them. I mean, at the end of the day, the cost of goods, the cost of what it took to make them was 10 times what they could sell them for. That didn't sound like a great business at the time. But think about that. I mean, there's such a learning curve. And they ended up manufacturing it using a process called stereolithography, which is, kind of a well-accepted practice. But when you've got a bunch of young people under 25 in their first or second job, there's a lot of significant problems to solve. If you were to look back at those three companies and why we funded them, I think the Lyric made the most sense, if you could pull it off, just because of the demographics. I think after that, Invisalign made the most sense, because again, the market size. The one that made the least sense, absolutely least sense, was the robot, okay? Now, Fred Moll, the fellow that founded Intuitive Surgical, worked for me at Origin Medsystems. He was my vice president of medical affairs or whatever. He has since gone out and founded another firm called Hansen Medical, and Hansen, using robotics, delivers a catheter up the femoral artery into the heart and does electrophysiology in the heart, okay? And what's exciting about it is the current practice is to take that catheter and thread it manually. And sometimes it goes here, sometimes it goes there. I mean, it's a real art form, and there's a huge learning curve. Now you've got a joystick, and you're just pushing it away, and you can see it. You can see where it is and what it's doing. That's pretty exciting stuff. He's also founded a company using robotics to treat baldness. And you got to see this one. So the patient is sitting here, and the robot, it's kind of like what you see on an assembly line in a car factory. It comes around, it takes a plug, puts it in. It's extraordinary, and yet it's the most precise way to do it, isn't it? If you've mapped it out and programmed it, it's the most precise way to do it. So you're taking a procedure that can go 10 hours at one sitting and reducing it to 1.5. What a productivity gain for the clinician. What a revenue stream for the clinician. So that's pretty exciting stuff. So these are all startups. And I really marvel, just because it's so hard to be successful. And when you can be Boston Scientific's maybe a bad example right now, but I mean, this was a venture-funded startup. Pete Nicholas and his merry men created this huge company that tried to buy a really huge company and have trouble digesting it. But they have $8 billion in revenues. Amgen, who we all know about, Genentech, Genzyme, Watson Pharmaceuticals, and the list goes on and on and on. And that's really exciting. So for everybody in the audience that is thinking about entrepreneurship, and hopefully many of you are, you want to keep in mind what's going on now, okay? So what's changed? Venture investments are down 35%, and there are fewer VCs. In 2000, there were 1,200 venture capitalists. Now there are 600 and some odd, and there will be fewer next year, okay? The investment bar has been raised. I think in this period of uncertainty, the natural inclination for people is to stop doing what they're doing, waiting for the bottom, wherever that may be, right? And that's not what we should be doing. We're in the business of investing. Opportunities are coming to us that are as exciting as they were a month ago, a year ago, and we should be investing in those opportunities. And the theme of all that is for the entrepreneur to never, ever, ever give up, because it is an uphill battle. This thing is running away with me. And that poor little frog up there trying to jump that big. I mean, you can't ever give up. If Zias Chishti gave up at a line, what a tragedy that would have been. If Fred Moll gave up building a robot with a bill of materials of like 1,000 parts. 1,000 parts. That's stunning, okay? So that passion counts for a ton, okay? And the ability to get the kind of people around you that you need to do things that you don't know how to do is really the key to that success. And so that's all I have to say. And I would love to have a question or two. Thank you.
Joe,
Yes, sir.
as an ophthalmologist, and I know you know a lot about ophthalmology, I think perhaps two of the, well, certainly the two greatest advances in ophthalmology were the intraocular lens implant and phaco emulsification, which is small incision surgery. They could be two of the greatest advances in all of healthcare. Any of you have had one done. My question is, phaco is a procedure. You can't patent it, other than the instruments to do it. And the implant, of course, is a device. Could you comment a little bit about the difference between, you know, a new procedure without a new device and the devices used in the procedure?
Actually, I think a couple of years ago, a physician actually in ophthalmology tried to patent his method of doing cataract surgery, which you can't do. I mean, it's just, everything about it is just common knowledge, all right? At the same time, this intraocular lens is a 6mm device with little loops. And all the innovations in the first several years were tweaking the loops, putting loops somewhere else, and trying to patent that. And it became so dense, okay, in terms of the intellectual property, and so litigious, okay, that it really scared a number of people away. Then it went to the softer lens, and then, you know, you certainly had more proprietary materials, as well as lens design, a foldable lens design. So ophthalmology, I think, was very innovative, and the clinicians are very receptive to innovations relative to other specialties, I think, which is great. And the clinicians are also very entrepreneurial. Okay, they look for ways to improve things. Okay. Yes, sir.
You said first funded is always best. But there are companies, like Bionics, for example, who did very, very well taking a product, making it better.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I'm thinking if I've got a great team and I'm first, I have a better shot at success. Obviously, when we were in ophthalmology, we were the 12th entrant into that market, so we really had to kind of figure a way to make it successful. But if I've got a great team and I'm first to market, I think I've got a better chance of success than others. You're always going to be aware of what everybody else is doing, and you'll be able to make changes, I think, more readily than perhaps some others. And so I think it's always an advantageous position, understanding full well that the second player is going to know more than the first in some instances and do very well with that.
Joe, there's a growing movement on patent reform, and a lot of, especially in the biomedical field, a lot of consternation that there are too many patents, too much, too many lawyers, at least too many patents. How many times have you walked from a deal only because there were patents that were being held by another company or university that had, if it weren't for that, you would find it an investable deal?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should ask that question, Joe. One deal our illustrious team evaluated and we eventually walked from is a deal that was started here at Case Western Reserve University. And our concern was the intellectual property. And so we made a very difficult decision. The entrepreneur was great, if he's in the room. He is a great entrepreneur. The device was splendid. The approach was splendid. We were really afraid of the intellectual property because the other people that held it were some of the large caps. And so we were afraid that we would be hurt by that, their position. At the end of the day, I think less than 12 months after we said no, they sold the company for $100 million. So, but in my opinion, intellectual property is great. Nobody ever has a slam dunk, and you only know the position you're in once you spend $1 million to litigate it. Millions of dollars to litigate it. So at the end of the day, you're better off competing in the market. But nobody listens. Nobody listens.
Joe, this is really interesting. I think the unstated assumption is that the context here is United States, Western culture, and so on. Is there an opportunity to make money where you wouldn't expect to make money? I think of Muhammad Yunus, who got the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006 for microfinance. And who would have thought loans of $25 would actually make money? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I'm on the board of something called Save the Children. Save the Children is a large international charity helping children in crisis in 39 different countries and the United States. We have a microfinance arm. We lend out $25 to $50 to mostly women because they're much more responsible with the money. And we have a 98% payment record. I mean, that's extraordinary, okay? But to your question, so there's a young woman out of Stanford. She developed an incubator for third world applications. The cost of that incubator is 20 bucks, okay? A standard incubator costs thousands of dollars. It is heated by the sun, it stores the energy, and it can be delivered in any third world environment. I mean, there are lots of opportunities. Somebody developed a filter in a drinking straw that actually filters out all the bad stuff in water, in contaminated water, and all over these third world countries, and it's been very successful. There's all kinds of stuff that not only has a place, intraocular lenses. So another young student that was in my class, Joel Segre, he went to India, and we supplied him with technology to manufacture these intraocular lenses. He went and he opened a factory. He opened it with a large hospital, the Aravind Teaching Hospital in India, a well-respected institution, and he manufactures intraocular lenses in India. So this young guy went there, and he has a story, a picture story of how he did it. And I'll never forget the photo of them hoisting this lathe to make the lenses, and finding that the lathe was just 2 or 3 inches wider than the entrance to the building. So Joel, and it was a hoist. There's nothing mechanical. There was 100 guys pulling on a big rope. So the opportunity in India, there's another picture of a school bus filled with 60 or 70 people with an eye patch smiling and waving because they had intraocular lens surgery. And the cost of the lens to them or to the hospital was 15 bucks. In the United States, the cost of the lens is 200 bucks. So absolutely. And the cost of the lens, it's kind of like a pharma. It has very high margins. So in fact, you can have a profitable business and do a world of good in some of these other countries. Hearing devices is the same thing, actually. Yes, sir.
I teach science and entrepreneurship. And one of the things is, I teach science and entrepreneurship. And one of the things is trying to open the mind of the student to recognize or understand a new science project and make it into a business.
Yeah.
What kind of examples do you use for that? I have my own, but I was curious to what you use.
What's one of yours?
Which one what?
What's one of yours, for example? Which one would you use normally?
Sometimes I show visuals where there's several kind of pictures and you have to say, okay, which one is it?
Yeah.
Or I go back to a 1937 book.
Right.
And see what were they doing then, what are they doing now?
Right.
And you know, incubators were one of the things. That's
Right.
what reminded me of that. And it's just, it's getting to think outside the box.
So I teach a class, medical device innovation at Stanford, and we have these are sophomores and a couple of really bright freshmen each time. And their homework assignments, they have 2 projects. Number one, you know, children have a big problem. You have to constantly drain their nose, right? And there's that little blue bulb that you use. Okay, students, I want you to go out and I want you to build a much, much more interesting bulb, all right? And they would come back with there was one fellow, he was sick on the last day of class, so he sent it in on YouTube. That was several years ago. What's YouTube? So we turned on YouTube, and he had a guillotine type thing, right? I mean, it was tremendously innovative, dangerous as hell, but but we weren't going to use it in a clinical setting, all right? We were looking to get the person to kind of think of how he could reinvent this wheel. And the second project is we take all of the clinical verticals, cardiovascular disease, ophthalmology, blah, 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 and tell them to evaluate the current devices, pick one out, and make it better, and do a business plan around it, okay? Take it to them. How are you going to get it to market? What do you need to do to get it to the market? How much is it going to cost? How much can you make? Who's going to buy it, all right? What are some interesting designs? The entire justification. And that's really tough because they're not trained to do that. They're not business students, they're sophomores. And so, but again, the stuff that they can come up with is so extraordinary. And the students I met this morning could do every bit as well, I'm sure. I mean, it's wonderful to witness what they can come up with in a relatively short time. So those are the examples that I use.
That's good.
We'll take one last question, and Steve, I'm going to trump you. We're gonna
A student.
give it to one of our BME students in the back.
Thank you. What if somebody comes in with a great idea, but the established company already has an exclusionary contract with the major GPOs? Does that factor into your decision of investing, or has that never been an issue?
Say that again? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The whole thing?
Yeah.
So somebody comes in with a great idea,
Right.
But like one of the market is maybe a monopoly or
Yeah.
something similar, where they have an exclusionary contract with like Premier or Novation.
Right. Right.
What do you do, or has that never
Right.
been a problem?
But it is a problem. I mean, it's a problem today, and it's always been a problem. I mean, in some of the surgical specialties, you got these really behemoths like a Medtronic, like Covidien, okay? And it's very, very difficult to get your widget in when they're selling 20 at a bundled price that is significantly less than you can sell your widget, okay? The only way you're going to do it is if you get those clinicians that believe in the clinical efficacy of that product and are willing to stand up and say, I want to use it. It's better for my patient, okay? That's how you can crack the code. And I think most every innovation faces that because all of those behemoths there, I mean, have been around for a long time. And the rest of the behemoths have been around a long time. So you're always fighting that. And you hope the hospitals, the hospitals, you've got to get beyond the purchasing agent. You've got to get the clinician to stand up and fight for it. So we see it all the time. We acknowledge it. It's kind of like something we have to deal with on a daily basis. It shouldn't stop you, though.
So no one asked Joe what his best investment was. I know on behalf of the Department of Biomedical Engineering, having you here today is one of our best investments. So on behalf of the